Welcome, traveler. Let me tell you a story about a grudge. A real, proper, old world, take it to the grave kind of grudge. The year is 1938, and Professor J.R.R. Tolkien, a man who didn't just read the ancient poems and sagas, he conversed with them. He decides he's going to have a lovely evening out at the cinema and watch Disney's most recent feature-length release, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He hated it. He hated it with the passion of a fire-breathing dragon hoarding its gold. He hated it so much that he would later use a term he coined for it like a curse for what it did to stories. And if you understand why he sat through that cinema, feeling like he'd just witnessed a profound spiritual crime, then you'll understand why, if he were alive today, he'd take one look at the modern movie landscape, and then he'd go to his study and barricade the door.
Your Majesty, people are struggling.
You know, I really don't remember you being this opinionated.
First, you have to understand who this man was. Tolkien was not some writer of pleasant children's stories. He was a philologist, an archaeologist of words. He understood that words like orc and dwarf and elf were not just empty vessels. They were ancient things, freighted with the weight of thousands of years of human fear and hope.
Do you know how the orcs first came into being? They were elves once.
He was also a veteran of the Great War. He saw the beautiful green fields of the Somme turned into a hellish, muddy wasteland. He knew intimately what real darkness could look like. So when he and his dear friend C.S. Lewis went to the cinema that night, they were not just two academics looking for a distraction. They were two men who understood the power of myth. And they got an education that night in what Tolkien considered to be sacrilege with a catchy soundtrack. Lewis later in a letter reflected on the Dwarves' party and how bad it was. He said it was pretty bad, and that the poor boob of a director probably couldn't imagine the Dwarves doing anything else. And what he was meaning was the silly singing. He felt like it should have had a little bit more thunder and stone to it. Tolkien's reaction was much less theatrical, but it was far more visceral. To him, it was a lie. A beautiful, meticulously animated, commercially brilliant lie. And the heart of that lie, the core of that rotten apple, came down to the 7 men who were supposed to be the heart of the mountain. You see, before Tolkien wrote his own, the word dwarf actually had tremendous, immense power. You see, in Old Norse myth, the Dvergar were not figures of fun. They were primordial beings and master craftsmen who forged reality from the very bones of the earth. They built the mightiest weapon in all of Norse mythology, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. They forged Odin's spear, Gungnir. They forged Freya's golden necklace. They forged the golden ship that Freya rode on, able to fold it up and stuff it in his pocket. They were beings of stone and shadow, and they were defined by their pride, their greed, their tragic honor. And when Tolkien finally wrote his, that deep, resonant song about gold and veins of mithril in the darkness. And Tolkien sits through cinema to see them reduced to what? Their most apparent and comedic character traits? Dopey, sneezy, grumpy, dark, happy. It's not just that it was silly, it's that it was lazy. And you may think, well, a lot of children's cartoons are that way. But they weren't then. Snow White sort of set the convention for all of this. And it's sort of a cheap gag that guts the source material, both the Sneevician myth as well as the Dwarves of Norse mythology and Germanic mythologies. And then it just sort of wears the skin of it as a costume. Tolkien saw a deep and ancient culture in lore being turned into a slapstick routine, and he took it personally. This wasn't just a personal creative choice. This was a profound act of disrespect. It was the first rule of storytelling, at least as far as the professor was concerned, being broken right there on screen. You don't get to borrow the magic of an older story if you're too afraid to show the shadows on screen. Interestingly enough, the only thing that he and Lewis agreed upon is that the animation and use of shadows in the film was actually very good. and a man thought, what if those dwarves sprang from fossil finds and were mistaken for earth foragers? See, Tolkien revered that seed of truth, and Disney just sort of buried it underneath gags. But it's more than just the dwarves, though. It's the whole attitude of the film. It was a story that was designed to be safe and approachable for children, and this infuriated Tolkien because he remembered something that we work very hard to forget in the modern age, and that's that children are not idiots, and you can't protect them from the darkness of the world all the time by castrating them and keeping them away from it. You have to prepare them, and these old, darker fairy tales were designed to show that the world is magical, but it's also incredibly dangerous. You don't prepare a child for the world by handing them a doctored map with all the dangerous areas erased or blacked out. A real fairy story gave a child a safe place to encounter fear and adversity. It teaches them that the woods are dark and that witches are real. And in doing so, it teaches them to have the courage to face those things. It gives them the dignity of their own bravery. And this is the man who would later go on to write Shelob and the Terrors of Mordor. He knew that you don't just shield children from the darkness. You give them a lantern to help lead them through it. Disney's version does the opposite. It tells us that the scary things aren't really all that scary. The problems can be fixed with a song, and the darkness is just a misunderstanding that can be solved with a kiss. This is a beautiful fantasy, but it leaves children utterly unprepared for the first time that they encounter a darkness that cannot be vanquished so easily. Tolkien's problem with Snow White wasn't that it was a cartoon, it was that it was a coward. That night in the cinema created a ghost, Tolkien's ghost, and it has haunted Hollywood ever since. A term that he spat like a curse at what he saw happen in that theatre. Disnified. The act of turning something with depth and a soul into something shallow and commercial. He saw it as a disease, a plague on the very art of storytelling. And here we are in the kingdom he dreaded, an endless parade of remakes and reboots and sequels and stories hollowed out and resold, not because there was anything new for the story to say, but because brand recognition is high. It's storytelling as grave robbing. And the most exquisite and tragic irony in all of this, the man who built the original kingdom, Walt Disney himself, would have hated it too. He once said, quite plainly, "I don't believe in sequels. I can't follow popular cycles. I have to move on to new things." The ultimate irony. The company that is now best known for championing the recycling of old ideas is violating a core principle of its very founder. It seems Tolkien's ghost isn't the only one rattling chains in that castle. I'd wager Walt right there next to him, and I'd even be willing to wager higher. He's even angrier. So, what's the lesson here? What's the story worth preserving? It is this. Every storyteller takes an unspoken vow. It is a promise to not lie, to not condescend, and to trust that the people listening in the dark are smart enough and brave enough and are worthy of the truth. A good story isn't a perfect polished mirror. It's cracked. It shows you the truth of things. Scars, flaws, and the places where it itself has been broken. The mirror of the storyteller knows it's been cracked and is not afraid to show where it has been repaired. And it trusts that we're strong enough to see our own reflections in it, damage and all. So let us raise a glass to the outrage of the Professor and his friend Lewis. Stay bloodthirsty, my friends, and for the love of all that is deep and ancient and dwarven, respect the dwarves. Stay bloodthirsty, and we will see you next time. Sláinte.